After studying African history and world history for several years, I began to notice a trend. It struck me that many civilizations across the globe made use of African men as enslaved individuals or conscripted soldiers. There were, however, also other uses, though few, outside of this range. In some cases, these civilizations would use African men as the very backbone of their power projection. I find this to be very interesting because it seems as though no other group of people have been so involved in other civilizations outside of their own like black men have. So today, I wanted to speak about the history of black men's participation in helping to build other civilizations. What up, African World? It's Home Team here, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview. My website Afrographics is available for resources on African history if you need it. Also, if you like this channel, you can support this content on patreon.com. And with a word from my sponsors, there's a new social media platform dedicated to educating and uplifting our people. No longer do we have to be censored for speaking our truth. Our Black Truth is black owned and operated, and a place where you can post your businesses and even monetize your content. You can download the app at Google Play or the App Store, and you can visit the website at ourbblacktruth.com. Links to everything in the description box below. Before we get into how African men participated in expansionist states outside of Africa, I wanted to briefly discuss how they built their own great empires and civilizations. One of the greatest conqueror kings in Africa was Sunni Ali, who founded the largest Western Sudanese state in West Africa, called the Songhai Empire. He was even known to have built a great navy to secure the Niger River. In southern Africa, the great Shangamire Dombo consolidated his power by defeating other kingdoms, destroying capitals and absorbing other local Shona peoples to build the Razvi Empire in Zimbabwe. He constantly defeated all his African foes, and even prompted the Portuguese to leave the plateau altogether. In Sudan, King Payanki of Kush and his Kushite forces created the first great empire outside of Egypt on the African continent. These are just a few African states established by African men on their own terms, owning what they create, if you will. So it's important we keep all that history in mind. One of the first signs of African men participating in other civilizations was in ancient times. The Persians were known as a powerful military force, and they established an enormous empire. But everyone in their ranks were not ethnically Persian. Most expansionist empires enlisted the aid of other peoples to increase their number and capability. Due to reputation or proximity, the Persians no doubt enlisted African men. In ancient times, the region of Nubia established a world-renowned reputation as excellent archers. The Egyptians called one section of Nubia the land of the bow, and much later the Arabs would refer to them as the pupil smiters. I think it's amazing because when we think of archery, we don't really associate it with African history at all. But it seems as though the ancient world knew that Nubians were one, if not the best archers in the known world, and the Persians seemed to make use of them as hired mercenaries in their armies. Surprisingly enough, the movie 300 did portray black men's involvement as an extension of Persian power. As we all know, some directors aren't as concerned with historical accuracy, but I think they deserve credit for this one. Despite the sort of neutral transaction in ancient times, the principal way in which black men contributed to the growth and consolidation of other civilizations was through conscription, in this context, largely meaning enslaved soldier. Before we get into that specific function, it's important to understand that not every black soldier in a non-African empire was a slave. This was not an absolute fact, and there are blurred lines, especially as it concerns our 21st century idea of an enslaved man or a free man. So we have to be cautious with our assumptions when we see these terms. But in general, most of the African men that I will be discussing were conscripted soldiers. One of the earliest uses of conscripted soldiers was by Muslim armies. Even before the Arabs swept across North Africa, black soldiers were present in their armies. One of the earliest mentions of an individual black soldier was a man named Washi. Washi lived during the time of Muhammad, and it was said that he distinguished himself in battle, especially during the capture of Mecca. Now, it's important to understand that black soldiers were always used in Islamic armies even before the 9th century, but they did not become supreme, if you will, until about this time. For example, Under the Umayyad dynasty, the first emir of Cordoba in Spain, Abd al-Rahman I, who came to the throne in 756, was known to have kept a large personal guard of black troops. He founded the Muslim dynasty that ruled a large portion of Spain for nearly 3 centuries, and all his successors used black soldiers especially to maintain power. When the 9th century arose, the face of the so-called Moors began to change fairly quickly. Ahmad Tulin, who came to power in 884, the first independent ruler of Muslim Egypt, began to rely heavily on black soldiers, most of which who came from Sudan, many of them Nubian. Upon his death, he's said to have possessed 24,000 so-called white soldiers and 45,000 black soldiers. In essence, his army consisted of black men. His son was protected by 1,000 black soldiers alone. One chronicler had this to say: "Wearing black cloaks and black turbans so that a watcher could fancy them to be a black sea spreading over the face of the earth because of the blackness of their color and of their garments. With the glitter of their shields, of the chasing on their swords, and of the helmets under their turbans, they made a really splendid sight." So it would seem as though the 9th century really ushered in the power of black soldiers, giving Moorish armies, mostly under Amazigh leadership, its distinction. In the 10th and 11th centuries, the Fatimid army was a very powerful military force. The Fatimids are believed to have been founded by a dynasty of Arab origin in the 10th century. Most scholars are able to divide the Fatimid ranks into 3 divisions, categories called Al-Masrika, the Easterners, Al-Maghariba, the Westerners, and Al-Sudani, the Blacks. The black Fatimid soldiers were considered by some to be the most faithful supporters of the Fatimid dynasty and were major players in the history of the Fatimid Caliphate. Even medieval authors who consistently expressed negative views on the black soldiers still acknowledge their significance. Now, granted, some can make the argument that this doesn't necessarily count as it concerns our topic, because these Muslim empires such as the Fatimids and others were still technically on African soil, and it would only be natural that African participation further south be inevitable. I think that's a fair argument. But one surprising way that black men were used in an expansionist state outside of Africa was the Spanish domination of the Americas. Scholars acknowledge them as the Black Conquistadors. Wherever Spaniards set foot in the Americas as members of conquest companies, they were accompanied by Black Conquistadors. Black Conquistadors participated in the conquest and pacification of the Americas as early as the 16th century. In many cases, they were considered an invaluable resource. According to the sources, there were entire contingents of black conquistadors who participated in the conquest of the Americas. Most black conquistadors were enslaved, but upon their service, they were granted freedom and even pensions. In other words, modern Latin American countries were founded in part by black men. The broader cultural context to the Spanish use of black fighters in the conquest and subsequent accounts of their roles is the Spanish perception of Africans as natural warriors. This perception is deeply rooted in Iberian and African history, going back to the role played by black slaves in Muslim armies of North Africa and the Middle East during the medieval phase of the trade in sub-Saharan Africans, and to the black experience of the Reconquista as armed auxiliaries on both sides of the conflict. I find it absolutely incredible that the same strategy Muslims used to establish some of their civilizations, the Spaniards also used to establish theirs in the Americas. The use of black men to reinforce other civilizations, as we can see, stems from a very long tradition, one that is barely recognized or acknowledged. Another striking revelation is how some African men helped build empires and kingdoms in India, Malik Ambar perhaps being the most well-known. African men held positions as guards, generals, and even administrators. Black men's position in India did have some duality, because even though they served in various subservient positions, they also built and maintained their own, like they did in the Bengal region and others. And of course, it would be a crime not to mention how the enslavement of black people in general in America significantly enhanced the speed in which this country became a superpower. And this goes for some other nations as well. The reason why this history is so unique is because we don't see other groups of people either being recruited or conscripted on this scale, on top of being present in so many regions across the globe. The extension of the black arm, if you will, to assist in the establishment of states in nearly every continent is a history that deserves so much more time and attention. I think it's time for our history books and popular culture as a whole to reflect the agency of these black men and not use them as anecdotal references when convenient. They need to be included as part of the histories in full. Regardless, I'm here to do that work as best I can. Anyway, I believe this history is useful to us in the diaspora, not as a utility for pride, but a reminder that we can build for ourselves and not put ourselves in a position to repeat this age-old tradition. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos and want to help in its continued production, consider supporting the home team on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.